So let's talk about vision. So here we have the first of many cartoons from my favorite cartoonist, the Awkward Yeti. So we got one eyeball, and the other eyeball comes up, and the second one says, "Hey, bro." The first one says, "Ah, don't stand in my blind spot, bro." Sorry, dude. So you will notice that the eyes are really muscular and buff. They're kind of bullies to some of the other senses, and we'll talk about that later. All right, so let's start with the structures around the eye. These are going to prevent foreign objects from entering the eye. So your eyebrows and the eyelashes, they help to catch dust around the eye, but they also help to channel air moving around the eye so that dust doesn't enter the eye in the first place. And yes, someone did do a study of mammals and found that the evolutionarily ideal length of eyelashes is about 1/3 of the width of the opening of the eye. So there's the article right there. So if you measure the length of the eyelash, you should be able to put 3 eyelashes across the width of the eye. That's the optimum length of eyelashes. Yes, apparently that is a thing. Longer eyelashes, whether naturally or chemically or mechanically enhanced, will change the way that air flows around the eye and may actually end up encouraging dust and other particles to land on your eye. Let's see, the eyelids are called palpebrae. We already knew that because we remember the levator palpebrae superioris. And these include a layer of skin, the muscle, and then a really tough fibrous core. There are also glands that we call tarsal glands on the bottom or on the deep side of the eyelids that prevent tears from overflowing and help to keep the eyelids from sticking together. Now, the lacrimal apparatus is the things that make tears and then carry the tears across the eye and carry the tears out of the eye. So it starts with the lacrimal gland, which has an orbital part, obviously on the orbit of the eye, and then a palpebral part in the eyelid. That's going to make the tears. Tears are mostly water with a little bit of salts and things like that. They also have some antibacterial enzymes that help to prevent infection on the eyeball. And their main job, though, is to lubricate the anterior surface of the eye and clean and moisten the anterior surface of the eye. And that helps to keep the eye clear of debris, but also keep the cornea, the clear part of the eye, healthy. So the tears are created by the lacrimal gland, flow across the eyeball, blinking your eye helps to distribute the tears. And then in the top and bottom eyelid, there's a little tiny hole called the lacrimal puncta, and that hole connects to a little lacrimal canaliculi. You remember canaliculi means little canal. And those little canals then carry the tears to the lacrimal sac and the nasolacrimal duct, which drains down into the nasal cavity. So the reason that your nose runs when you cry is that your lacrimal glands produce more tears. There's more fluid flowing down through this nasolacrimal duct and into your nasal cavity and then out of your nose. If you produce a lot of tears, then it's too much to go through these little lacrimal puncta, and the tears will then spill out over your eyelids and down your cheeks like that. You can sometimes see the little lacrimal puncta as little holes on that water line on the eye. So this is just that process. The fluid is produced by the gland that disperses across the surface of the eye, drains out the puncta through the canaliculi to the lacrimal sac, down the nasolacrimal duct, and out the nasal cavity. All right, so now let's look at the anatomy of the eye itself. This is a sagittal section through an eyeball. The human eye is about an inch across, 2.5 centimeters across. And there is a lot of fat that cushions between the eyeball itself and the bone. And I will post a link in Canvas to another video on my YouTube site that shows me dissecting an eyeball. So you can see all these structures and you can see how much fat there is around the eye and patting it from the bone. Now there are 3 tunics, and a tunic is a layer of tissues or several layers of tissues together that have a common function. And in this case, the tunics tend to have different tissues on the front of the eye and the back of the eye. So the fibrous tunic is this outer layer of the eye. On the back, it's a thick white layer. It's very, very tough. And it's made of dense, irregular connective tissue. And it's called the sclera. And that's what we think of as the white of the eye. And then the front part of the fibrous tunic is clear. It's see-through. That's the cornea. So you can literally, see through it. That's why it's see-through. The cornea is curved. It's convex. It's a convex curve. And it actually has 3 layers in it, with a really thick collagen layer with some simple squamous on the inside and outside. Light is going to pass through the cornea and get bent a little bit before it enters the eye. So that makes up the fibrous tunic. The sclera is the white part, and the cornea is the clear part on the front. Now, the cornea is moistened by tears, but it's also protected by the conjunctiva. And the sclera is also protected by conjunctiva. The conjunctiva is a cellular layer here. It's this light pink layer here that produces mucus, and it produces some tears, but mostly mucus. Part of it covers the inside of the eyelid. Part of it covers the actual sclera itself. So it helps to moisten the eyelid, helps to distribute tears, but it also protects the sclera. It also contains blood vessels. So the sclera itself is just connective tissue. The blood vessels that we see on the white of the eye, those are actually traveling through the conjunctiva. And the conjunctiva doesn't cover the cornea, because if there were blood vessels on top of the cornea, we couldn't see through them, and that would prevent us from, seeing. So the conjunctiva only covers the sclera. If you have an infection of the conjunctiva, then you have conjunctivitis, which is commonly known as pink eye, and it's going to itch, and it's highly contagious. So keep your fingers out of your eyes and keep your fingers and your eyes away from other people if you have conjunctiva. All right, so here is the fibrous tunic on the outside, and then we can see that there's this. The next tunic has a lot of blood vessels running through it here. That's that pink layer there. And then on the front, it's got blood vessels and muscles as well. And then the innermost layer of the eye is neural tissue, and that's called the retina. So let's meet all of these things. All right, so the next layer is called the vascular tunic. Starting at the front, it includes the iris. The iris is the colored portion of your eye. The hole in the middle of the iris is called the pupil. So your pupil can dilate or constrict, that is, get bigger or smaller, depending on the movement of the muscles that make up the center of the iris. So there are 2 layers of pigment-forming cells that create eye color. And that's how you get different combinations of things, like you have some brown and some green, you get hazel. And then the iris itself, behind those pigment layers, there are 2 layers of muscles that dilate or constrict the pupil. There is a concentric muscle called the sphincter pupillae, and sphincters are all round muscles. So the sphincter pupillae is a round muscle just like the orbicularis oris, and when it contracts, it is going to constrict the pupil. The dilator pupillae is a layer of muscle that radiates out like a star pattern out from the pupil. And when it contracts, it pulls on the pupil and dilates the pupil. Okay, so those are the 2 layers of muscle within the iris, and the iris makes up the front of this vascular layer, vascular tunic of the eye. Okay, so here is a little sphincter muscle, and this is tongue, and tongue says, a sphincter says what? And the sphincter says, oh, real mature. And tongue laughs really hard, and he says, I'm not even that kind, I'm a capillary sphincter. And then eye comes up and says, my iris is a sphincter, does that amuse you? And tongue says, no, sir. I thought it was funny. All right, so when the sphincter pupillae constricts, it constricts the pupil. The dilator pupillae goes this way, and that's when that constricts, it dilates the pupil. The sphincter pupillae is primarily under parasympathetic control. The dilator pupillae is under sympathetic control, and that makes sense if you're frightened and you need to say run away from danger. You need more light to bring in more information about whatever danger might be happening. Obviously, if you are being chased by, say, totally realistic example, a T-Rex in bright sunshine, your eyes, the light that would normally constrict your pupils is still going to constrict your pupils. They might be a little more dilated than normal because of the sympathetic innervation, but they're not going to just like be totally dilated if that's going to create too much light for your eyes. All right, so we got the next part of the vascular tunic is called the ciliary body, and that's this section here and here. And this is a group of muscles that are attached to the lens of the eye with these little strands that are called suspensory ligaments. So when the ciliary body contracts, that pulls on the suspensory ligaments and flattens the lens. So the relaxation and contraction of the ciliary body is going to change the size of the lens, whether it's thick or thin, and that is going to focus the light that's coming in through the pupil. So that's how your eye focuses. So this is an electron micrograph of an eye, and you can see these ciliary muscles here, and then these little tiny suspensory ligaments. Here's the lens here. The lens is actually made by connective tissue, primarily collagen, in layers and layers and layers, kind of like an onion. So in preparation for an electron micrograph, you kind of see this separation of the layers there. So this is the lens, these are the suspensory ligaments, and then the ciliary body, these ciliary muscles here. This structure that we can kind of see in the background here, this is the edge of the ciliary body. Okay? And then finally, the choroid is the posterior portion of the vascular tunic, and it has a black layer on the, I guess, deep surface, the one facing the retina, facing the inside of the eye. And then it has a bunch of blood vessels. So it provides a lot of the blood flow to support these other structures in the eye. And then the black layer of the choroid absorbs excess light that passes through the eye and passes through the retina. What we see in nocturnal animals is that the choroid is covered by a layer called the tapetum lucidum, and that tapetum lucidum is actually reflective, and it reflects light back to the retina. So the light goes through the retina, bounces off the tapetum lucida, and comes back to the retina. That actually provides more light for night vision. Since we are a diurnal animal, meaning that we are primarily active during the day, we don't have that because that would actually produce too much light on the retina and might actually damage the retina. So when we see light shining in the eyes of nocturnal animals, we see that their eyes glow white, like these cats and cows. And what we're seeing is the light actually bouncing off the back of their eyes, off that tapetum lucidum. If you take a picture of a human, when their eyes are dilated, then they have red eye, and that's actually because the light is bouncing off of these blood vessels in the choroid and the retina. So that's why people get red eye in pictures. Okay, so this is a dissected cow eye. And in this dissection, a lot of the fat had already been taken off. So what we see here, these dark pink layers, this is actually muscle, okay? The eye is filled with a gelatin substance that we'll get to in a minute. And what we're seeing here, this is the lens. This black part here is the choroid. This tan layer here is the sclera. The ciliary body, you can see this black part, and then it gets a little lighter tan, black here. This darkest black is the ciliary body. And then, so this is the front half of the eye. This is the back half of the eye. The tan layer here that looks sort of squishy, that's actually the retina. This is the neural layer. And then this almost greenish layer there, that's the tapetum lucidum. And then the choroid sits behind that. This part right here, that's actually where the optic nerve exits the eye. And we will come back to that in just a moment. All right, so the retina is the innermost layer of the eye. And this is a neural layer. It does have two layers itself. The primary layer is full of photoreceptors and neurons. The photoreceptors are bipolar neurons, and then they communicate with other layers of neurons, and I'll show you that in a moment. They're going to actually respond to light signals and create action potential in response to the light signal. And then there's a pigmented layer at the back of the retina. The weird thing about the retina is it is not actually attached to the choroid. It just kind of floats on the choroid, which is a little weird. So if you've ever heard of somebody who had a detached retina, what happened was the pressures keeping the retina against the choroid got lessened, and the retina can actually kind of bubble up from the back of the eye. It's a little weird. So when we look up close at the retina, what we see there's lots of blood vessels here in the choroid, and then all of this is the retina. Okay, it's many, many layers of neurons. And then there is this blood supply for the retina itself, and those arteries and veins travel through the middle of the optic nerve. The optic nerve is made up of axons of neurons from the retina. Because the optic nerve has to pass through this space at the back of the eye, there are no photoreceptors where the optic nerve leaves the eye. And so you can't see there. There's no cells that can respond to light. That's what photoreceptor means, respond to light. And so this is what your blind spot is. So normally the space that would show your blind spot is not noticeable because your other eye can see that spot. So since you have two eyes and their field of vision overlaps, you don't notice your blind spot. You have to cover up one eye and then look in a specific spot to notice the blind spot. You'll do that in physiology class. When your doctor looks in your eye, they are looking to see the structure of the retina. So this is an actual human eye. I think this is my eye, actually. And they can actually see this bright spot at the optic disc. Now, it looks like it's glowing. It's actually not. There's no light coming from inside my brain, even though I am obviously brilliant. Kidding. What you're seeing is the optic disc is white because it's myelinated axons. And so what you're seeing is the light that they're shining through the eye bouncing off the optic disc. That's why it looks like it's glowing. The other thing your doctor is looking at when they look at your eye is they're looking at these blood vessels that travel through the retina, because one of the first places that you can see symptoms of high blood pressure is actually in the eye. So they look at spots like here and here where blood vessels from two different layers cross. And if you have high blood pressure, one of the blood vessels will kind of get smushed or expand where those two cross. And you can actually see that. And that might be the first sign that you have high blood pressure before you experience any other symptoms. So if you ever go to the eye doctor and they say, hey, you should go to your doctor and get your blood pressure checked, you should definitely go do that. You may actually have high blood pressure, and high blood pressure can kill you from a heart attack or a stroke or other conditions. So this is the neural organization of the retina. So we're zoomed in really close on just a little section of the retina like this. So we have the choroid back here. We've got the pigmented layer of the retina, and then the neural layer of the retina is all this. So, of course, this is the back of the eye, right? So the front of the eye would have been over here, or in this model over here. Light is coming from here. And here's the weird thing about human vision. Well, most vertebrate vision is that light has to go through this whole neural layer all the way through here, and the receptive parts of the photoreceptors are back here. They're not even on the front of the photoreceptors. These are the photoreceptors. Light has to travel through all of these layers to get to the receptive part of the neural layer. And then the signals, the action potentials, get passed from these bipolar photoreceptors, bipolar neurons, to other neurons, some that integrate signals from different neurons together, and then some that integrate this way. So we've got horizontal cells, and then these bipolar cells, and then more cells. And then finally, these bipolar cells, their axons are going to make up the optic nerve. Okay? If you were an octopus, you would not have a blind spot, and you would have clearer vision. So this is the vertebrate eyeball, and you can see that the photoreceptors are in the back here, where number 1 is. And then number 2 is the axons that become the optic nerve. You have a blind spot here, and here's the optic nerve. The eye in an octopus is flipped, so not flipped, but the retinal layer is flipped, so that the photoreceptors are on the front, where you would expect them to be. The processing layers are behind, and then the axons that become the optic nerve are at the back layer. And so there's no spot like here where there are no photoreceptors, and so the octopus doesn't have a blind spot, which frankly is cooler. So one of the reasons for, one of the things I want to talk about is the difference between the focus you have in front of your eyes, the sort of main field of view, and your peripheral vision. So if you look forward and hold your hands up kind of to the side, but in front of your body, but to the side. sort of in front of your shoulders. If you don't turn your eyes to look at your hands, you can see that your hands are there. You can wiggle your fingers and see them moving, but you can't see details of your hands. Okay? So what you're seeing there is you're seeing the light being processed in your peripheral vision. But when you're looking straight forward in your main field of view, straight in front of you, the vision is very, very clear. And that's because there's a spot in your eye where the light doesn't have to do this trek through all these layers of cells. I got ahead of myself. That is called the fovea centralis. And in this area, the upper layer of neurons is actually pulled back so that the light more directly hits the photoreceptors. There are tons and tons of rods and cones here. Those are the actual photoreceptors, not so many of the other processing cells. And so your vision here is clearer, okay? The photoreceptors themselves they are called rods and cones. The rods have a rod-like end and the cones have a cone-like end. The rods are most sensitive in dim light. They're better at processing black and white. They don't process color. They are most numerous outside of that fovea centralis. So they're more numerous in your peripheral vision. They're better at processing light in dim light, so you use them more at night. The cones process color, but they have to have really high intensity light. So within the fovea centralis, you have lots and lots of cones, not so many rods, but you can see more clearly in bright light. So that's why your vision at night is not as clear and you don't see colors as clearly as night. You're using more rods, which don't process color. And at night, you're relying more on the peripheral vision outside of the fovea. This is what a retina looks like on a microscope slide. So you can see this really dark choroid back here and then this thin pigmented layer. The rods and cones are here. This is actually the photoreceptive part of the rods and cones. And then we have the bipolar cells and the ganglial cells, and then the axons of those ganglion cells. This part is going to become the optic nerve. Okay, so again, looking inside the eye, we see the optic nerve here, and then this dark spot right here, that's the fovea centralis, where there aren't any of those ganglion cells. And then the macula lutea is the area around it that doesn't have as many of those processing cells, but does have much clearer vision. If you have degeneration of the cells in the macula lutea, then you have macular degeneration, and you don't just have fuzzy viewing, you actually start to develop a blind spot that's very noticeable. So a person with macular degeneration, often what they do is they don't look straight at whatever they're looking at. They look sort of to the side, so they're using more of their peripheral vision. So if you ever notice someone doing that, it might be that they actually have macular degeneration. They're just trying to use the spot of their vision that actually works. It can sometimes involve bleeding and scar tissue in the macula. It can be a major cause of blindness, and it is linked to diabetes, infection within the eye, smoking, high blood pressure, but also any kind of trauma could lead to macular degeneration. We now have laser surgery that can slow down the degeneration, but we don't have any way to replace the rods and cones that have been lost. So once someone starts developing macular degeneration, there's no way we can halt it. We can slow it down, but we can't restore their eyesight. All right, when we look at an eye on a microscope slide, what we see, we can see all of these structures really clearly. So here's the cornea. This is the front of the eye. This is the back of the eye. There's the optic nerve. So here's the cornea. We have this anterior chamber that is filled with a clear fluid called aqueous humor. And then here's the iris here, right behind the iris, the lens. It looks kind of like it got broken on the edges because it did get shattered when they were making the slide. And then here is the ciliary body with the ciliary muscles. Okay, so this is the iris, this is the ciliary body. The posterior cavity of the eye, that's all of this space back here. And this is filled with that jelly-like substance that's called vitreous humor. And it's clear, so it doesn't bend light, but it's very dense, much more like jelly, and it helps to maintain the eye's round shape. So this gooey stuff here, this is the vitreous humor. This is the optic disc. Right there, that's that space where there aren't any photoreceptors and where the optic nerve leaves the eye. And then this, of course, is the retina. And you can see in the dissection, it started to come loose from the choroid and the tapetum lucidum because it's not attached, which is weird. Okay, so we've learned all of those parts from the cornea, sclera, ciliary body with the ciliary muscles, lens made up of the sphincter pupillae and the dilator pupillae, the lens held by the suspensory ligaments to the ciliary muscles. All of this here, this is all the ciliary body here. The choroid, and then the retina here with the blood vessels traveling through the retina. And finally, here is the fovea centralis, the optic disc, and the optic nerve. Okay, so make sure that you understand the difference. The optic disc is just this area on the eye where the blind spot is. The optic nerve is this whole structure leaving the back of the eye there. All right, so how does all of this work to make vision? The cornea bends light a little bit as it enters the eye. The aqueous humor does not bend the light at all. The iris controls how much light enters the eye through the pupil, but it doesn't bend the light at all. But the lens does bend the light. And then the light is bent so that it focuses on the fovea centralis at the back of the eye. If the lens stops being clear, then you develop what are called cataracts, and those are just opaque spots in the eye. This person has very, very severe cataracts. And as you might imagine, if you have cataracts, then everything's cloudy because you're literally looking through white structures. Cataracts are a very common cause of blindness. They are linked to diabetes, but one of the most common causes is UV exposure, which is why you should wear sunglasses when you're out in the sun. We do now have surgery that can correct cataracts. We can actually replace the lens in an eye in order to fix cataracts. We can just put a different lens in there. There are also people developing eye drops that dissolve the cataracts, and that, of course, would be nice because it wouldn't involve surgery. Okay, so if you have normal vision, we say that you have emmetropia, and that means that the bending by the cornea and the lens work together to actually focus light on the fovea centralis. The focal plane of that light is right at the fovea centralis, and you can see things clearly, and that must be nice. If you have hyperopia, then you are farsighted, meaning that you can see things far away, but not things close. So the cornea and the lens are focusing light in a point that's actually behind the eye. So we put a convex corrective lens in front of your eye to correct that so that light is landing on the fovea. If you are myopic, then you are nearsighted, meaning that you can see objects that are close but not objects that are far away. And the focal point where your eye is focusing light is actually in front of in front of the fovea. So hyperopia is usually because the eye is too short. Myopia is because the eye is too long. It's more like a football shape. We put a concave corrective lens in front of your eye, which bends the light so that the focal plane is in the correct spot. Now, LASIK is a way to correct vision by changing the curvature of the cornea itself. Because remember, the cornea does bend light a little bit as it enters the eye. So what they do is they slice the front of the cornea off with a very, very small, very sharp knife. They use a laser to remove layers of the cornea. That will then change the shape of the cornea. And then they put the flap back on, glue it back on with a biological glue, and then give you special eye drops, give you, I think, eye patches to cover your eyes for a few days. And if you are very careful about how you do your recovery, then you will have normal vision. Unless there was something about your eyes that made them change again, and then, well, you could have LASIK and then just need glasses again in a few years. And that is the end of vision, and that is the end of chapter 19. Enjoy, and I will post some more later.